Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the last session of the PUC for this year. Good to see all the diehards that did not went away to Schiphol and so on. So, I am Daniel van Doorn. I work for consulting work since 5.5 years. Started developing OpenEdge in 1997. And I'm a frequent speaker at OpenEdge-related conferences in Europe because mainly I refuse to fly to America. In my daily life, I do a lot with DevOps, the continuous build and integration, deployment of applications. Yeah, that's about me. So I work for consulting work. We are an independent IT consulting organization focusing on OpenEdge and related technologies. Our main office is in Cologne, Germany. We have subsidiaries in the UK, USA, and Romania. And we have customers all over the world except in Asia. We are a vendor of developer tools, and our main focus is consulting services. We are specialized in GUI for .NET, Angular, OO, software architecture, application integration, and we are definitely experts in OpenEdge application modernization. So what do we do? Well, OpenEdge, Telerik, OpenEdge Ultra controls for the people still using GUI for .NET, Telerik Sitefinity, Kinvey, Corticon, WhatsApp Gold, since some time also Camp Loadmaster for the load balancing of PASOEs, Protop database monitoring in Europe, List and Label. We do web frameworks like Angular, .NET, Java, Elasticsearch, Lucene, of which I still have to find out what it is, Amazon, AWS, Azure, DevOps, Docker, Jenkins, and Gradle, Jira. That's all my department. So, but this presentation is about web handlers, and we're first going to talk about the HTTP basics. So whoever used the internet? So who asked Google for something? When you first open the Google page, you do a get to get a website. When you then, for instance, search for Consulting Work Software Services Ltd. and you press the Google search, you do a post action to a web server. And with that post, the information is on the server and Google can do something with it. So we have a number of those HTTP verbs, as they are called. And they originate from the web server. So we have the get for getting some data. We have the post for posting data. We have some more than I described, but we have the put to update data. We have patch also to update data, but then you have to supply only the fields which are changed, and the delete to delete data. Those HTTP verbs can also be very nicely used with a PASOE and a web handler. Yeah, and whoever had seen a 404 code on the internet when your page is not found, probably everybody. So when you are doing an HTTP request to a server and the server formulates a response to you, the response always has a status code. So you might be familiar with those. These are just a few of the status codes. They are typically between the 200 and the 500. 200 is okay, everything went fine. 201 data created. Probably you have seen the 400 bad request, 403 forbidden, 404 page not found, 405 method not allowed. So that means you are authenticated on a server, but you are just not allowed to execute a certain method. And the 500 is when you are screwing up your code and something goes wrong on the back end, then typically 500 error is returned. I took here the site from Mozilla for the HTTP status codes. You can also have a look at them at Wikipedia. They are nice and complete over there. We always make the joke about the status code 418. There is this protocol for a coffee machine, and the status code 418 is I'm a teapot, so I cannot make coffee. Right, so whatever works on a web server, we could also use very well for our REST API. We need to get, put, delete, and patch data too. And it would also be nice if we inform the client about the status of the request. Was it okay or is it in error? So we can reuse that stuff that was invented long ago. Right, the PASOE. Who of you is already working with a PASOE? The majority. Who of you is still working with a classic app server? Cool, still some. I did not expect that. Right, the PASOE. It's the Progress Application Server for OpenEdge. It was first introduced in OpenEdge 11.5. It has a number of protocols. First of all, APSV over HTTP, your normal app server protocol, but then over HTTP. And REST and SOAP. I have rarely used the REST one. I never used the SOAP one. I don't like the way Progress implemented that. And we mainly use the web transport for REST and for SOAP too. Right, so that was introduced in 11.6 and it was enhanced and more stabilized in 11.7. Since that time, it's stable and robust. So starting with OpenEdge 12, only the PASOE is available as the classic app server is retired. The PASOE is 64 bits only. It can handle, though, 32-bit and 64-bit clients. The 32-bit client for OpenEdge 12 is still available. The PASOE comes with your development environment. You can license it as a production product or from the Progress ESD, and sometimes also from Docker Hub. You can download the PASOE image. So the PASOE is built on top of Apache Tomcat. Don't let Mike hear it, but I would say it's something like a web server with a Progress batch client. It's not completely true, but we get into that later. So there is no specific load balancing. It's just a single web server with that Progress client on the background. And something I like very much as a DevOps engineer, there is no dependency on the admin server framework or OpenEdge management at all. You can, if you want, use the OpenEdge Explorer to administer your PASOE. It's not needed. I wouldn't do it, and I do not like the Progress Explorer. Everything can be done in the command line. I would advise you to do that. So, right, a little bit of history. So in the good old days, when we want to run an app server, we needed an admin server, a name server, an app server broker that would run several agents, and those agents would run .r or .p code. Then, well, connecting a progress client to that app server was relatively simple. But it started to be harder when you, for instance, want to expose something to the internet. Then you need the AIA, what was it, the App Server Internet Adapter. Right, so it was not so easy to maintain, deploy, and especially not automatic. Is there what? So the PASOE, in contrast, the app server broker is completely replaced with the session manager Tomcat web app. So there is now an app server agent written in C++, and it is multi-session and in parallel threads. It is capable of handling requests in parallel. Right, an agent is capable of maintaining multiple sessions at one time with a maximum of 200 sessions per agent. To scale up, you can use more agents or increase the number of threads. And the scaling is more lightweight. So how does that look? Well, we have the Apache Tomcat on top. We have something called the Spring Security Framework, which handles your authorization. And we have then a session manager web app, the OEABL.war. Under that lives the multi-session agent, and I think it's _pro adsv.exe on a Windows machine. And no, that is not the same one as we had on the classic app server. And here you can run again .r, .p files or classes. Right, so the session manager supports 4 types of transports: APSV for your app server protocol to connect OpenEdge clients. Web was made to incorporate web speed into your PASOE, and it has become our favorite protocol. SOAP and REST, as said, I rather not use those. So, web handlers. They are available since 11.6, and they provide a flexible way to handle requests. There is a synchronous request response pattern. So request, handle that in the code and formulate a response. It would support HTML page generation as it is the modern version of WebSpeed. And it supports service requests as well. And it's flexible enough, as said, to provide an alternative to the REST adapter and the SOAP adapter. So it are ABL classes, and they are extending the OpenEdge.web handler. Right, so web handler. There is a default web handler and a compatibility web handler. Those are made to do web speed. And we also now have different web handlers, which we can use for different stuff. Let's see where this goes. Right, so a web handler is an ABL class, OOABL. It inherits from OpenEdge.web handler. And you have to provide methods for handling the HTTP verbs like get, post, put, patch, delete, etc. So here we see the methods: handle delete, handle get, handle not allowed, very important. When you write a web handler, you need to have the handle not allowed and handle not implemented. When, for instance, a get comes in and you do not have a method defined for handle get, then it will take the method handle not implemented, and that will return a 500 error with an error message. Well, we have then some handle options: patch, post, put, request, and handle trace. Right, so it was designed primarily for web speed, and it is really a replacement for webdisp.p. Any people who have web speed experience from the good old days? And right, additional handlers can be set up in OpenEdge management. That does not make sense. So URL mapping, configuration based. We will see that in some following slides. And Tomcat parses the request URI for patterns. So we see here local host, which is the host name, web, which is the type of transport. And then in this case, there is a web handler with the name customers. And the last thing is the customer with customer number 1, the ID of the customer. It should have a higher ranking in search engines compared to the classic web speed. So with the cgip.exe/customers.w !custom is 1. But I wonder how much of those REST endpoints are really in Google and people search for that. Right, the configuration. So every PASOE comes with its own configuration file. It's the OpenEdge.properties. For people who are a bit longer in the OpenEdge world, it is like the replacement for the ubroker.properties, but this is limited to your own app server. But you can define in this properties file things for all the transports. So we see here the default handler, the OpenEdge Web Compatibility Handler for web speed. I fairly rarely do something with that. And then you see handler 1, handler 2, handler 3, handler 4, handler 5. So what is behind the handler? Behind the handler is a class name and a package name. So in the package customer, there seems to be the customers class, and that points to the REST endpoint / sales rep with a sales rep ID / customers. Those web handlers, I think you can define a maximum number of 99 here, but Progress reads this OpenEdge.properties file. It starts with handler 1. If handler 2 is missing, it will not read handler 3, handler 4, handler 5. So the numbers must be without any holes in the numbering. Since 12.7, 12.8, this will be improved because you can then define your web handlers in a JSON file that will come at one of the following slides. What can we say more about this? Well, we see here handler number 4, and we see its customers with a custom that will return a single record. Handler number 5 will return a collection of records. Right, so no gaps, no duplicates. those web handler numbers must be without holes in there. Yeah, when you have duplicates, the first matching handler based on the URL is the class that will be chosen to be executed. Right, 12.6. So in 12.6 we don't have to configure all the web handlers anymore in OpenEdge.properties. We can have a JSON file in WebApps, WebApp name, that will be by default root, webinf, adapters web, and we can have there something like root.handlers. So how does that JSON file look? Well, here it is. So we see the class names and we see the REST endpoints. And you also see a flag enabled, yes or no. Right, if you want to see more, you can look at our GitHub. The presentations will be available in the coming weeks on the website of the PUC. So you can find the presentation, follow the URL, and have a look at our RESTful samples. Providing the response, right. The response is of the type web response, and you need a content type. That content type can be application JSON, text HTML, text plain, image PNG, binary, whatever a web server can return, you can return with your web handler. So you could also return a PDF or a docx, whatever you like. The property for the response payload, so that's in the web response, is the entity property. It is of the type progress.lang.object. And well, that supports JSON object, JSON array, OpenEdge.core.string, but also the mem pointer and the widget handle for an X document if you still want to use XML. Right, so this is an example of a simple handle get method in a web handler. We see something happens there with the sales rep, and it gets some sales rep data from somewhere. The output is JSON, and you see that the response entity is filled by the JSON. Then the write response method is used to write the response back. And here they do it a little bit ugly. They return the 200 as 200 OK. But the response also has a status code as a property, and you could also assign the 200 there. There is, by the way, also an enumeration for those status codes. Yeah, so a little bit lower we see the errors. So when something is not found, we return a 404 error. And when something else goes wrong, then we return a 500 error, the internal server error. So here we have the getSalesRep method. We find a sales rep, we empty the temp table, we copy the sales rep from the database table to the temp table, and we convert that in JSON, and then we can nicely return that as REST. Of course, when you convert this to JSON, you could use the serialize hidden to hide some fields. You could use the serialize name to change the names of the fields when you expose it as REST. Right, a JSON array, that's about the links. when you want to do RESTful, and for instance, you have a sales rep and you want to see all the customers of the sales rep, you can make links in your REST response. Those links are also in a URL format. So here we have a sales rep SLS, and if you see this link on the bottom, then it would say, give me all the customers of sales rep SLS. Right, so this is a sample of the output. We have here the sales rep HXM, Harry Mundvink, with his monthly quota, and there on the bottom you see those RESTful links, one to customers, one to self. To self is regularly done, especially when you are asking for a collection and you just need the name and the region. Then you get the links to get the full information of the sales rep. Right, so based on the properties content type and entity, and web handler can support any media type. We could return images, Word documents, PDFs, anything that you can wrap in a mem pointer really. And we also can do multi-part responses by using an instance of OpenEdge.net multi-part entity. Especially when your response is getting too big, then multi-part is the option. So this is a sample about a web handler which returns an image. So we see here localhost 8820, the URL and the port of our PASOE, the web transport, and there seems to be a REST endpoint image, and image/test. No, test is part of the path. So test says sample image is the image that will be retrieved by this web handler. So below here we see the response, and we see that we get from the file name the image. I just missed the part where, okay, right. When a file extension is used, then we can determine the content type based on that file extension. To stay with the sample of images, PNG, GIF, JPEG, an icon. And otherwise we can return an invalid parameter value exception, and that will cause probably a 500 error. Right, so if you want to do something binary in progress, then you need to load it into a mem pointer. And nowadays we have classes around the mem pointer which decorate the mem pointer a bit with some extra methods and options. I think since OpenEdge 12.8 they have enhanced the language to also be able to use index on a mem pointer to faster search inside a mem pointer. That was not possible before, so we really had to read the mem pointer character for character to see if there was something we could use. So this has become a bit faster. Right, so what we see below, we get a file based on the file name. We do a copy lob to the mem pointer object, and the O picture is then a new openedge.core.mem pointer. Oh, this is not an object. This is a primitive data type with a wrong prefix. Right, so, and then we can just use the response entity and assign the picture to there. That will return the picture to a client. Right, oh yeah. And when you are working with mem pointers, then you have to do finally a set size 0 to empty the mem pointer. Shortly said already that PASOE is a multi-session, multi-threaded agent. And when you have a small memory leak in 200 parallel threads, then it fastly becomes a very big memory leak. I have seen servers where almost 1 terabyte of memory was fast consumed by a PASOE observer where the memory was not rightly handled and people did not clean up very well. So yeah, as an alternative, we just saw that we had a web handler for customers and for sales rep, and we did something with that web handler. In the Smart Component Library, we do not have a web handler for all our business entities. We have a web handler / entities, and then you supply the business entity name. Then we have something called a service manager. It will look up if there is already a running instance of that business entity. When it's not there, it will start it, and then it will ask that business entity for data or to write data. Right, if you want to know more about that part, there is the link to our RESTful services of the Smart Component Library. So yeah, I shortly said this already. So we have a web handler entities, and it has a REST endpoint customers. By that REST endpoint, our service manager knows that it should load the customer business entity. At Consulting Werk, we believe in a strict OERA implementation. You know what that is, OERA? It's the lasagna, where you do not go out of your layer. So on the bottom you have the database. On top of that you have a data access layer. The data access layer would be really the only layer that you compile with database access. And from anything on top of that, so your business entity, service interface, and any other classes, just use data sets and temp tables. So you could compile those without any database access. Right, our web handler implementation asks the service manager for a business entity. Business entity is loosely coupled with a data access instance, which gets the data, puts it in a data set. You can enrich it in your business entity by obtaining data from other business entities and then return it via the web handler. How do we do that in the Smart Component Library? Well, we do that annotation based. So in the business entity itself, you can write annotations, 2 different types, on top for a single record and on the bottom for a collection. We see here the address with customers and the custom. We already saw this ampersand custom, colon custom, in the OpenEdge.properties, and we can extract this. So we can choose here to return 2 tables, e-customer, e-sales rep. Since we use business entities, we like to name our temp tables with an E prefix, E for entity. Some of our customers directly change that to TT again because they have nostalgic feelings with that. ID custom, that's the unique identifier on the table, and the fields which are sent to the client by default. So that are, in this case, eCustomer.star, all fields from the customer table. And from the sales rep, just the rep name and the region. Then we have annotations. Can read is true. Yay, we can get data. Can update is true, so we can put or patch data. And can delete is true. We have child addresses, so that goes to the sales rep, and also links to other business entities. Here, for instance, to the orders, which shows all the orders of a customer. Right, so the second annotation is a collection. And that means we have no unique identifier here, like above. We just ask for all customers. Now, if you are known to, for instance, Jira or something, then you might know that when you use a REST API and you have a collection that you can filter on different types. So I could, for instance, use all customers where country is Germany. What is more interesting here? Well, we see only the table customer is returned, and we limited the number of fields to name, city, and country. And yeah, here below we see links again. So then we have the Richardson maturity model. Steps towards the glory of REST and RESTful. So level 1 is resources, and level 2 is HTTP verbs, and level 3 is hypermedia controls. And we go to level 2, HTTP verbs, and that are the URLs here to the sales rep orders and sales rep again. When you review this as home, you can have a look at martinfowler.com, the Richardson maturity model. Brings me almost at the end, I think. Right. Yeah, be nice and restful. So REST endpoints, for some strange reason, are always plural. You always ask for customers, if it is a single record or a collection. It's not that there is a W3 standard on this. It's a de facto standard, but you see it's almost all over the world used. And for instance, when you try to be RESTful, don't return your errors as 200 OK. It's really not nice, especially when you work with something like Angular. It does stuff. It goes into a different flow with a different status code in the response. So when you have an error, make sure the status code is the appropriate error code. Right, REST endpoints are in plural, both for a collection and a single record. On top of our REST API, we can use Swagger OpenAPI 3.0. I think it's open source, it's on the internet. There are a lot of examples. I always make the joke to my Smart Component Library trainees that we as backend developers do not like to talk to web developers. And with a Swagger page, we really do not have to talk to the web developers anymore. So out of your REST endpoints, you can create a JSON file, and that JSON file is consumed by the Swagger API, and it gives you a nice Swagger page. Of course, this feature is integrated as standard in the Smart Component library. When you don't use the Smart Component library, you have to do some coding yourself to create that JSON. So this is what the Swagger page looks like. So we see here the REST endpoints with the available methods, and we see here the different HTTP verbs like get, post, get, put, patch, delete. That depends on how it was implemented and how you configured your JSON file for Swagger. When you would click, do we show? Yeah, we show something, but it's small. So when you would click, for instance, on get, you get a new screen, and oh my God, I hope you can read a bit of this. And you can then enter all the parameters that are described in your JSON file which you fed to Swagger. That can be the query for a collection or the options for a REST invocable method. And that will be then executed. There is here an execute button. And it will give a status code back and a reply in REST. Here, when you have really good eyes, you can also see some of the headers that are sent with the response. Can we only use JSON? No, not at all. I just already named it a bit. We could reply in JSON, XML, binary. We can still do HTML. It's still web speed. And we can return Word documents, whatever binaries we want to return, we can return it with a web handler. Photo taken? Yes. Right. Oh, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
You said that there was a maximum of 99 WebHandlers in the configuration file.
Yes.
Is that the same when you use JSON file?
No. However, in 12 years of Smart Component Library development, we now have 43 web handlers. That comes partly because we have some web handlers for the JSDO, but for all the business entities, we have one web handler. I would advise not to make too much web handlers. You can better have one web handler with the correct paths in your URL that calls into your business logic. Yeah, but yeah, when you get close to the 99 web handlers, I would say you're doing something wrong. Any more questions? No? Well, then that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. Hope to see you next year in Prague. Then I'm probably more awake than I'm now, but we survived. Have a nice weekend.